Crime and Crime Again is a true crime podcast containing subject matter that may be graphic or disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Keeshae Jacobs grew up in Richmond, Virginia, with her older brother Davon. They were raised by their mother Toni, who is an absolute force. She is genuinely such an amazing woman. Toni served in the Army and was deployed in Desert Storm when she was just 18. During her service, she took leave when she was pregnant with Davon, and eventually, she was honorably discharged. She later had a baby girl, Keeshae. As a single mom, she worked incredibly hard to provide for her children, and she always made sure that they were taken care of. Toni was so involved in everything in her kids' lives, and she was incredibly close with both of them. She even coached Keeshae's cheerleading squad in elementary and middle school. Keeshae and Toni were especially close. They spent a lot of quality time together, whether that be shopping trips at the mall or getting cozy at home to watch a scary movie. Keeshae confided in her mom about just about everything, and they kept in communication with calls and texts every single day. Davon and Keeshae were always close, despite some typical sibling rivalry. As a teenager, Davon was involved in a car accident that caused a traumatic head injury which would later cause memory loss and changes in his personality and moods. Davon eventually became acquainted with the wrong crowd. In 2015, Davon was arrested on a drug-related charge and ended up serving a year in prison. This separation from her brother took a toll on Keeshae. It threw the family dynamic off balance, and it was difficult for Toni and Keeshae to be without Davon. But in September 2016, Davon finally came home, and Keeshae was thrilled to have her brother back. At this time, Keeshae was 21 years old, and she was living at home with her mom, while she worked various jobs to save up some money. She was taking some time to explore what she wanted to do in life and what career options she had. Keeshae was ambitious and driven. She was determined to make her own money and make her own way in life. On September 26, 2016, Keeshae texted her mother Toni to let her know that she would be staying at a friend's house that night and that she would be home the next day. Toni told NBC News, quote, "She's 21 years old. I didn't ask which friend she was going to. I tried not to pry too much." End quote. The next morning, Toni went to work, expecting to receive a call from Keeshae between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m., which was Toni's normal lunch break, but the call never came. She tried calling Keeshae several times, but her phone was going straight to voicemail. Growing anxious, she called her son, Davon, hoping that he would know where Keeshae was, but he hadn't seen her or heard from her since the night before. When Toni returned home from work later that day, she knew instantly that Keeshae had never come home. It was not in her character to disappear and not let her mother know where she was. Toni started calling Keeshae's friends and even started going door to door to ask if any of her daughter's friends knew anything, but not a single one had heard from her or knew where she went on the night of September 26th. Around 2 a.m. on September 28, 2016, after hours of making phone calls and searching the neighborhood for her daughter, Toni called her sister to ask for her advice on what she should do. They agreed that it was time to report Keeshae missing, so Toni drove straight to the Richmond Police Department at 2 a.m. to file the report for her daughter. But, and we've seen this so many times before, they did not initially take Keeshae's disappearance seriously. They claimed that she was 21 and how did Toni know that she didn't just run away? But Toni was insistent. She even showed the officers her phone to show them how many times a day Keeshae called her and texted her. She showed them that she hadn't talked to her daughter in over 24 hours, which was completely out of character. The police department took the report, but they still didn't seem to be taking her disappearance seriously. There didn't seem to be any sense of urgency. Days after Toni reported her daughter missing, 3 of Keeshae's friends came to her with an unsettling confession. They had withheld information from Toni about the last time they saw Keeshae. Originally, her friends had said that they didn't know where she went on the night of September 26th. It turned out that the friends had actually dropped Keeshae off in the Churchill neighborhood, about 10 minutes away from her house, where she said she'd be meeting someone. Her friends said they didn't know who the man was that she was supposed to be meeting. They also told Tony that Keeshae planned to meet a female friend at the man's house as well. Tony went to question that unidentified man herself, and though he admitted to knowing Keeshae and seeing her the night she went missing, he claimed that Keeshae called someone else to pick her up from his home, and that was the last time he saw or heard from her. He said that Keeshae had only been in his house for a few minutes that night, but he couldn't keep his story consistent at all. At one point, the man told Tony that Keeshae had last been to his house at 5 p.m. on September 26th, but Tony knew that that was impossible. Keeshae was home at that time, and Tony had been talking to her all throughout that day. She had even seen her that evening, and Keeshae didn't leave home until 11 p.m. that night. The man continued trying to change his story and couldn't seem to figure out exactly what time and what day he had last seen Keeshae at his house. While she was at the house questioning the man, Tony actually called the police and told them about his suspicious behavior. Police came out and they did search the man's home, but they found no evidence of Keeshae having been there. Keeshae's phone, ID, and overnight bag have never been found. Several months after Keeshae disappeared, authorities publicly stated that they suspected foul play in her case, but have never elaborated further. 2 years after her disappearance, 6 News in Richmond published an article stating that there was an unnamed, convicted felon under investigation for his information regarding Keeshae's disappearance. That, however, is all we know. Years later, and Keeshae has not been found. Just months after Keeshae Jacobs went missing, tragedy struck the Jacobs family again. On January 8, 2017, Richmond police responded to reports of a shooting at a Motel 6 just before 11 p.m. There, they found a man who had been shot and pronounced him dead on arrival. The man was 25-year-old Keeshae Jacobs, Keeshae's older brother. The next day, a 39-year-old man named James Henshaw was arrested and charged in connection with Keeshae's murder. However, 2 weeks later, Henshaw was released on a $20,000 bond. The judge's reasoning for setting bond so low was allegedly that Henshaw turned himself in, had no priors, and had a family. Keeshae also had a son that he would never get to go home to. Henshaw was later arrested and charged again, and in February 2018, a jury convicted him of second-degree murder. However, in another infuriating turn of events, Judge Gregory Roop granted Henshaw a brand new trial after he determined that certain evidence was misrepresented to the jury, and that evidence could have pointed toward a self-defense argument. Before the new trial started, Henshaw entered a plea deal in which he pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter, meaning there was no need for a new trial. The jury in the first trial recommended that Henshaw be sentenced to 15 years in prison, but after negotiating a plea deal, a judge sentenced Henshaw to 10 years, with 5 suspended and credit for time served. This meant that at the time of his sentencing, Henshaw would only be serving 3.5 more years for Keeshae's death. Tony continued pursuing her education, and a couple of years after Keeshae disappeared, she accepted a certificate in substance abuse counseling from her community college. She still hangs flyers, holds events, and speaks to the media about Keeshae's disappearance. The Black and Missing Foundation recently premiered a documentary on HBO entitled Black and Missing. Tony features in the documentary and talks about Keeshae's disappearance, and the work that the Black and Missing Foundation has done to help her in her search for her daughter. Tony Jacobs has suffered so much loss and devastation and heartbreak. She lost both of her children within a span of just 4 months, but she has never stopped being their champion. She has not for 1 second stopped fighting, and she never will. But she shouldn't have to fight alone. Keeshae Jacobs was 21 years old when she disappeared on September 26, 2016, from the Churchill area of Richmond, Virginia. She is 5'3" and approximately 110 pounds. Keeshae has several tattoos, including a leaf tattoo on her right foot, paw prints on her upper right thigh, a flower on her right shoulder, a flower on her right wrist, and her mother's name, Tony, on her left shoulder. She was last seen wearing black basketball shorts, pink and black Nike basketball shoes, and a pink scarf. If you have any information about the disappearance of Keeshae Jacobs, please call Major Crimes Unit Detective William Thompson at 804-646-3925 or call Crime Stoppers anonymously at 804-780-1000. You can also text Crime Stoppers at 274-6 637 using the keyword iTip. All sources for this episode are listed in the show notes. Please be sure to leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you'd like to request a case for me to cover, there's a link in the show notes for the case request form. You can follow the podcast on Twitter @CrimeAgainPod, on Instagram @CrimeAgainPodcast, and on TikTok @CrimeAgainPodcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of Crime and Crime Again.